Hello and welcome. My name is Cameron McCool and I'm a visual artist. I study drawing, painting, and sculpture at the New York Academy of Art, and my work revolves around the portrait and the human figure. And you can see more of it at mccoolart.com or on Instagram at yamchops. I'd like to share with you my approaches to drawing the portrait from a sculpture, which can be found in the MFA art collection. And in order to do so, we're going to have to engage on the elements of drawing, some of the basic proportions of the head, and understanding form, which is pretty much learning the story of light, and memorizing a few tricks with shadows. And if we can control these on the head proportions, we can start to engage the portrait on paper. For materials, I want to keep it simple, especially since we're in quarantine, and so we'll just need a pencil, paper, and eraser. And for pencil, my favorite is the Blackwing Palomino. And you can get them in a box like this. They're not the cheapest, but they go on like butter and just make the drawing experience so enjoyable, so I highly recommend them. And for paper, I'll be drawing in my Moleskine sketchbook, but any kind of paper will do. I started drawing as a kid on printer paper, and as long as you can control line and value, you can make a beautiful artwork on any surface pretty much. And lastly is the eraser. I'll be using a kneaded eraser, which is great because you can kind of reset it by stretching it, and you can shape any design you want to remove from the pages. And erasing is just very important. It's a part of drawing. It relaxes the pressure of the drawing itself, and we're going to mess up, and that's just part of the learning experience of drawing. And these mistakes help guide us to where we need to go next. And so don't be afraid to use it. Grab an eraser. The piece I've chosen is by one of my favorite French sculptors, Jean-Baptiste Crapaud, and he studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, France, which was the main classical academy of the time, alongside some other big names like Degas, Renoir, Delacroix, and Bouguereau. And the piece itself is called The Spring, or Le Printemps in French, and it's a classical personification of spring as a young, joyful figure. And there's eagerness in the expression and excitement for the rebirth that spring represents. And as with many of the other personifications of seasons, there's going to be nature and foliage in the headwear and the dress. And the way I approach complex nature is through abstraction and simplification, so we can kind of sneak up on it and bring more focus to where I think the main feature is, which is the portrait in this composition. And we've got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. For the head proportions, first we need a basic head shape, which kind of looks like an upside down egg from the front or an apostrophe from the side. Halfway down from the top of the head to the chin, we have the eyes, each of which sit about one eye's width apart, as well as from the sides of the head, and they sink a little bit into the face when viewed from profile. If we mark the eyebrows a little bit above the eyes, then halfway down from the eyebrows to the chin is the nose, which is also one eye's width apart, and it lines up with the tear ducts just above. 1/3 down from the nose, we have the opening of the mouth, which lines up with the center of the eyes. From the top of the eyebrows to the bottom of the nose, we have the ears, and the ears don't start until halfway back into the face when viewed from profile. The hairline depends person to person, so that can be anywhere from halfway to 2/3 up from the eyebrows. Now if we start adding some details for lightness and value for form, we have a portrait. Our three elements are going to be line, value, and shape. Line comes in all kinds of styles: straight, curved, S-curve, zigzag. Value is just darkness to lightness. And this is very important to learn how to control the speed of your value, as in how smooth you can make it go from dark to light. In this case, it's going very slow. It takes a while to get to light. In this case, it's a fast transition from dark to light really quickly. And then shape is just the basic outline of anything. It's very two-dimensional and flat. And so when we combine line and value, we can create edge. And my favorite way to create edge is just to start up against the line and darken away from it. That way I can control the speed of that value. So now we've just got a medium speed going away, and the line starts to disappear. Now if we combine value and shape, that will give us form. So it's just controlled value starts to give it the illusion of light catching on a shape. So to understand the principles of light, we'll want to start with a basic shape, in this case a circle, just that flat two-dimensional outline. And I'm going to draw a cone of light, and that just is nice to reference in any drawing or painting. It tells me which direction the light's coming from, and I can reference it anytime to check where I want to put my shadows. And we're going to start to give light a story, so we'll assume with logic it's brightest, closest, facing the light source. And we'll start to move away from the shape, using its form to kind of guide our slow transition into darker values, really soft, really smooth, and that ensures that it's a smooth, round object. And just to the point where we get to where the light will no longer reach the backside, this is called the terminator, where the light terminates, and we can kind of just flatten in that back shadow shape. And if there's light bouncing around a room or from the clouds, what we're going to get is reflected light in the shadow. That's a bit of a glow that's still in the shade, but we can still see it because it's not pitch black. And over here, we can start to add what's called the core shadow, the part that's not quite hit by the direct light and not quite hit by the reflected light. It gets a bit darker right at that turning of that hill. And again, maintaining that really soft transition, and that'll tell the viewer that it's a soft object. With all the light coming from one direction, one light source, where it passes the form and hits the table or surface, that's still illuminated, but where it gets caught by the form, it's going to have a cast shadow, the shadow that is cast by said form. And that's going to have a sharp edge, and we can just fill it in flatly. And the good way to understand that sharp edge is imagine you're a tiny little figure walking up to a big sphere, and you can still see the light from that vantage point. But as soon as you walk into the shadow, it's a sudden cutoff. That sudden moment is why we have that sharp edge right there. It just happens really quickly, as opposed to that soft transition that rolls away from the light source. Another way to visualize this is with two imaginary hills. One's a slow rolling hill, the other one's more steep. And with this slow soft one, we're going to have a slow rolling transition. It's less light, and now we're on the backside. But it's kind of smooth, kind of slow. Whereas the steep, we're going to get less light, and we're already over the hill. And so there's going to be a sharper terminator, a sharper turning, thus that sharper transition of value. And this can help cue us into if it's a sharp shape, soft shape, if they have a round nose or a sharp nose, if it's a cast shadow, or if it's a round form. Lastly is edge, where we're turning line into edge with value. So pick any line, and then my favorite way is to kind of shade away from it and turn that line into edge. And immediately you can start to see that table pop forward. And if we just go around eliminating line by line and give them edge, it starts to put them more into a shared space, a shared atmosphere, that things aren't just cut out and pasted together, that there actually is an illusion of light. Whenever I start a new artwork in any medium, I always start with a gesture, which is kind of like the spirit of the pose. And that can take place as a stick figure or an abstract form. And in this case, I'm kind of feeling this form is moving up and to the left, out of the wide base and the tilted shoulders that kind of launch me upwards, and then the gaze turns me left. And it's wherever your focus goes, it's however you react to the pose. And at this point, it's just kind of a flexible scaffolding. So we're just trying to get the placement of the major shapes locked down, and we're going to slowly lower in those details little by little from light to dark, and then take it from there. And now I'm starting to lay in those key features from the proportions, but again ensuring that they apply to our specific subject with their own, in case the nose is smaller or larger or the mouth is higher or lower. And so I'm just chipping away really lightly, and everything can be adjusted. The high peak on this cheek is a great example of one of those turnings or core shadows that we saw on the sphere. And it's almost like the peak of a hill, and we can start to softly darken it because it's a really soft form, very round, not too sharp. This unique shadow beneath the neck with that curve on the left and that sharp, acute angle to the top right was one of the first where I started to see a complex nature that I'd rather simplify into an abstract shape. And so I started to look at it and almost saw a slice of pizza, believe it or not, and I attempted to draw that instead to try to go for the accuracy of the likeness rather than trying to see into those shadows where there's little light, which means there's less information. And now I'm starting to go back around the form and the composition and just starting to bring up everything together before I get too far in the face. Because if I take the face to a finished look and then realize that things need to be shifted a little bit, right now it's early enough that I wouldn't mind erasing and moving things around, but I just want to make sure that the whole thing works as a composition together. Just like a big skyscraper, you want to bring that foundation all up ensemble, or like an orchestra, I'm conducting it. I'm going to slowly introduce all the instruments together rather than finish with one and then move over to the next. It needs to come up together as a whole. I'm starting to attend to those soft turnings of the shadows. Just this forehead is very smooth and rounded, and so it's naturally going to have a soft, smooth turning. Same with the cheek, but not pushing too hard because nothing's set in stone. Things can still be moved left and right in case I got the angles wrong. But just starting to suggest, as opposed to that nose shadow, which because it's cast, the light just does not reach that lip because it's caught on the nose. Getting into a complex, specific detail such as the mouth, I find it really helpful to just try to find these, what I call animal shapes. And they just have such characteristics that in this one specifically, I saw a sperm whale. It kind of looked like Moby Dick to me. Like it has that little hump on the back, just like the whale. And it's one of the most surreal tricks I know that works better than anything else, because you don't need to know anatomy. If you just go around collecting these strange animal shapes or whatever and draw them the way you see them with their certain of the softness, sharpness, where they're angled up and down, you will actually draw that feature more accurately than had you tried to break down the complex anatomy, complex shadow turnings. And just above it, I'm seeing a dove shape in the nose. Another perfect example of, rather than bisecting the anatomy, I'm just going to chase this kind of almost simplistic cartoon outline of a dove, but watch it fall into place, and at the same time it becomes the most perfect edge to a nostril and to the bottom cast shadow of the nose. It's surreal, it works, and it's actually really fun to go around doing that from life and from photography. And I know it seems like I'm crazy, but it's one of the best tricks in the book. I'm seeing the tail of a panther as it slinks to the left. So the pupil is kind of like the curled up hind leg as its lower back just starts to sleep into the shadows. So we only see the back half of this panther, or that's what I saw. That's how I approach that. And I'm laughing sometimes as I'm drawing because it's just really bizarre, these tricks, to kind of see these hieroglyphics or an animal, or just even if it's a funny triangle, you can probably capture that triangle pretty accurately, as opposed to seeing the cartilage and the soft tissues all interwoven. Instead, just draw the triangle and get that likeness accurate, and you'll have drawn a very idiosyncratic and specific portrait. Here, I'm about to engage the first outer edge, as I demonstrated on the sphere, just starting to turn lines into edges. And this is a light form of that cheek in front of a dark space behind. And it just, if you squint especially, it looks really crisp, really sharp. And so I can start at that line and fade outwards. And as the face gets further, I don't want to forget all these other extra details that are up in the headdress. And so I'm just going to go back up there and really abstract them, simplify them into as basic blocky forms as I can, because the details will be put on top of that when it's ready. As I start to set down the value structure as we move down the composition, I'm about to do what's called a lost edge. And it's just a decision where the values are close enough. I don't see a lot of high contrast, especially when I squint, or at least it's close enough. And so I just decide to connect the object or the foreground to the background. And I just sketch right over that line. And the result is a very emotive atmospheric quality. It kind of thickens the air, and it looks like the figure is merging out of darkness and emerging into light. And I find it a really nice quality to add wherever I find values are semi-similar. And from here on out, I'm just going to be repeating those elements and principles across the sculpture, and it's based on what attracts me, what brings my focus, and that's what makes art so magical. It changes person to person, and yet using these rules of light, you can kind of engage soft form, cast shadow, sharp edge, soft edge, and it tells the viewer the nature of what they're looking at. And it's almost magic to create dimensional form on a two-dimensional piece of paper. So in conclusion, I'm really happy with how it turned out, and even more so with the journey of just kind of reacting to how it made me feel, so where I think it's moving, what's important to me, and starting to use these simple techniques to start to build it up based on proportion, edge, and follow the light. Let the light do the talking, and just analyze what it's doing, where I can clarify softness or sharpness, direction of these values. And it's just a fun thing to learn, because when you go into museums, you'll be able to see what the artist was thinking, as well as when you go into nature, you can observe what's happening around you with all these light effects. So I hope you're able to learn something that you can take into your own art as well as life, and be safe and keep drawing. Thank you.